My name is Sam Jenks, and welcome to another episode of The Way We Source, a podcast hosted by Kodiak Hub, where we share our talks with procurement practitioners, leaders, experts, consultants, content gurus, and people what we find downright inspiring, diving into the role that sourcing and procurement plays in the way that we live. If you like today's episode, make sure to rate the program and give us a follow. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting an experienced procurement consultant who has helped hundreds of procurement organizations with enhancing their operations and driving forward tactical and strategic wins. He hosts a deep specialized focus within public procurement, offering us a unique view for today's episode, which we look forward to diving into deeper with today's guest, Magnus Josephson. Magnus, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. So kind of you.
Yeah, it's our pleasure to have you. I'm curious of starting a little bit with a question that we ask a lot of our guests. What made you choose procurement? And also, what does procurement and sourcing as a role mean to you?
Well, let me start with the second question there. First of all, this might sound strange, but I don't use the P word anymore. Or try not to. P as in procurement. I rather prefer to use the word investment. That's more about the output, the outcome of the money that you put in. Procurement is more tied to the process of getting a contract, the procurement project. And that gives too much focus on the legislation and rules, etc. And if you start with that, the outcome won't be as good as if you start with the end result, the result of the investment. So, creating a win-win on a long-term basis, that's one thing I think is important. And to get clear return on investments, ROIs, and to prove it and measure success in different ways.
I think that's a very, very good way to look at procurement. And I think a lot of our listeners would probably agree with you as well. Starting with the end in mind, the goal, the return on the investment is very important. Looking back on your career, which is a long career where you've helped hundreds of organizations. What's one thing that you now know that you look back wishing that you knew at the beginning?
It's not the procurement process. It's a return on investment or best possible outcome of the investment. The result of success, that is the most important thing. You should always start by defining how to measure success and what's the best possible outcome. And that's hard in the beginning. I have a master's degree in law, and I wanted to be a legal expert, and I became that within EU directives on public procurement. And that naturally makes you focus on the process and the rules and not take care of the end result, unfortunately. I think that's quite common.
At the beginning of a career, I think that it's also tough to have that broader perspective. Do you have any tips for people that are getting started in the procurement space, just, starting out their careers of guiding principles or things that you would suggest for them to be able to do?
Well, that's actually what I just said. Try to ask the buyer, which is often the manager in some sort of public entity. If you look 2 years ahead from now, what would be the best possible outcome with this investment? What would be a positive change in what you do with this money? I ask that all the time. That's the first question I have when I meet like an IT manager. I don't know anything about IT, but he or she does. So what's your day-to-day problem that you want to get rid of? And an answer to that can be, we have so many things and gadgets that we can buy, but it's always different agreements and contracts. I just want to pick up the phone and order what I want. Can I get that? Or is that against the rules? It's going to be on that level where we start.
You think that anecdotes are always very important because obviously, procurement as a function is a very anecdotal function, being that you have to work together with so many stakeholders. Can you remember one organization that you've worked with or an experience that stuck with you and it was mainly because of a lesson learned or something that created a pivotal point in your career?
Yes. Speaking of end results and investments and partnerships, my longest cooperation is with Apple for about 15 years now. And when we started, this was in 2006, I think, they sold almost nothing to the public sector. While Microsoft had about 99% of the public sector market, in Sweden at least. A few years later, Apple had the largest market penetration in the world per capita in the Swedish public sector. They passed like $200 million in revenues 5-6 years later. And for me, that was a big turning point, because then I got more jobs from Apple within UK and other European countries. So I definitely found sort of a way into the public sector there for any company, I can say. And the key word was to create partnerships with the public client. In this case, it was schools. What was really difficult with this was that Apple has a computer that's 5 times more expensive than the competitors. Right. And we wanted to sell it to schools that are sort of the poorest of the poor within the public sector. So how can you combine this, the most expensive computer to the poorest public? Well, we explained to the schools and the school managers that anyone can deliver a box with a computer in it to the lowest price, to their door. But only one, which was Apple at that time, could make these computers a useful tool for teachers and pupils and create a digital classroom. And that was a partnership that the schools needed, with an onboarding process containing education of teachers, having access to ebooks, digital learning materials, etc. So that was a very important step for me, and also, well, schools in this case, I think.
And an important experience as well, I think, from procurement as a whole, right? Because procurement is transitioning so much from being focused on cost and risk to transitioning towards total value or total cost of ownership. And I think that when the focus is put on value, when the focus is put on the holistic offering, contra just the lowest cost possible, possibly also at the expense of good quality or great quality, then of course you are missing out on potentially the best offering. And I think that that's also a really interesting anecdote that puts that in perspective as well. When you look at...
Thank you. Well, I also use the analogy with buying a stock. Well, that's why I use the word investment. You should have the same perspective if you buy computers in this case as when you buy a stock. What do you want to happen with the stock? Well, you want it to increase its value, and you also you get an annual revenue when it's paid off from its profits. And if you think like that, when you buy a computer, for example, what is the increased value? Well, more pupils than before can learn in more ways, and might find school easier for them to handle.
Right.
And also the school will become more attractive to teachers. So that's both short and long term effects.
Starting with the end in mind. I love this theme. So if you look at your roles in the public sector, and I know that you've worked in both public and private, but what do you see are kind of the primary differences, being that obviously you have, of course, a much broader experience within the public sector, between public and private procurement, or private and public investments, if we'll call it that way, since we're not going to use the P word today.
You can use it if you want to. I understand.
Okay.
Well, I work with between 600-700 companies, and most of them sell both to the public sector and the private sector. And when they complain about the public sector focuses on lowest price, etc., I ask them, well, is there a difference between your private, your company clients? And well, very often they say, yes, they are much more result-oriented and they look more long-term on the investment. Okay, so what have you failed? Where have you failed in your communication to the public sector is the next step that we work with. Yes, it's another culture. They don't have this the same business logic that you you find in a company. In a company, there's how much profit can you get, and in the public sector is how much money do we have the last of December every year.
Right. That budget needs to get spent up. I mean, I think that there's also the aspect of politics within public procurement. I mean, from your perspective, how political does it get with public procurement?
Well, it differs, of course, but my personal opinion first is that it should be involved as little as possible.
Sure.
The primary agenda should be to make the best investment possible for the taxpayers' money. And with a political involvement, that tend to benefit only one part of the voters, the majority. I think that's morally wrong, not fair, when the fact is that everybody has paid in their taxes, regardless of political standpoint. But having said that, at the same time, every investment can have a political dimension. Some examples, and we try to make that when I worked with companies to get higher up in the conversation level with the public clients. For example, public housing in Sweden, at least, has had a tenfold increase of bed bugs the last 10 years.
Okay.
And this, in spite of that, the local authorities put more and more money on the problem to get away with it, but it's still increasing. And I have two thoughts on this. When it comes to political dimension, then, it is a political question, I think, that publicly owned apartments have much more bed bugs. Is that really acceptable? Why should the public apartments be, worse off than the private? And then also economically, why is it accepted that the problem gets bigger and bigger, although they pay more and more to solve it? I think it should be the other way around. The more you pay,
I would agree. I think most would agree. Yeah, sure. What's the problem
here? The solution here is to combine politics and economy. So they must say with my the output approach, we the politicians have decided that whatever you buy, for example, bed bug sanitation, must result in solving or minimizing the problem in the long term. And if you don't do that, you're not doing your job.
Yeah. I think it's there is an element or a layer of complexity that's added. I think there is another aspect, and I know that you often stand as a middle part between buyer and seller, right? Yeah. Both helping and coordinating or consulting sellers to be able to get into the public domain, and then also vice versa, helping public sourcing and procurement teams to be able to pick the correct bids. Right. And I think that gives you a unique understanding, but there is one aspect of public procurement that is true, right? Typically, they're longer term or frame agreements that are being put in place between these entities, right? It's not a 1-year contract. It's typically 5-10-year contracts, right? How do you find that middle ground in those long-term agreements, especially when you take into consideration things like, for example, shifting and dynamic problems that come up, something like, a bed bug, epidemic in a small part of the country or a city. How do you make sure that those long-term agreements have elasticity, but also flexibility, but also are structured enough for a long term that's going to keep the seller and the buyer happy? Because it seems pretty complex.
Yes, it is. Due to, organizations change, people change, they change jobs, and it's never the same people in the beginning of agreement as they are in the end.
Right.
So that's complex. But I to begin with, I call them let's solve the problem agreements. Or let's solve the problem partnerships. Whatever the problem is, it's both parties' responsibility to get together and look at a long-term solution. Compared to, I'm the buyer, you do what I tell you, and tell me when it's fixed and send the invoice.
Right.
The buyer steps down from that position, playing sort of an expert of how to solve things. Just because they have the money, and it says, I don't know how to solve it. I just know what I want in the end. I know what the problem is and the end result. And then the supplier comes in, okay, here are some alternatives. So problem solving is the foundation of this. And then there are some other really important things. This is my favorite question, how to make long-term contracts work.
Okay.
And the most common mistake that both parties do, and I think many of the listeners to this might react now, so might be good to listen up. I think that it's a problem that they make the agreements too dependent on relationships between different stakeholders in the organization and the buyers and sellers organization.
Okay.
And some listeners now might say, what relationships is the most important thing in everything in sales and business? And yes, of course, relationships are not unimportant, but don't make them too important. Why? Well, as I mentioned, things changed. People come and go, and companies merge with other companies, and things happen all the time. Sickness leave, retirement, etc. And the world is changing, new challenges come, old one goes. You can't get stuck in old solutions. So how do you solve this? How do you handle this? Well, by automation. Instead of creating lots of relationships, lots of meetings, you strip the agreement down to 3, 4, or 5 metrics, meaning ways to measure success. Like, are we holding a budget? Are we decreasing the problem? Are we having more or less trouble with the problem we want to solve? And how do you automate? Well, this is a method that I haven't come up with. This is a very interesting person called Dr. Dean Kashiwagi in the United States that came up with it. He calls it the best value approach, BVA. And there you have, during the agreement period, a weekly risk report. In this weekly risk report, you report, are we on budget? Are we on time? Are there any risks ahead? Is the problem moving in any direction? And that's really all you need when you come down to things. Of course, it's nice to talk to colleagues, etc., but it's better to use the time in executing the contracts instead of just meetings. And with this, you can't sort of devoid too much from the goal.
Process and performance dependent rather than the people and the relationships. That I can be able to get on board with in certain aspects, and I think that it does align very much so with the fact that we are moving towards a data-driven world as well in a lot of ways. And I think that those SLAs that you have in place need to be in place to be able to keep a relationship happy on both sides long term. Based upon the fact that you've worked in so many organizations, I'm curious, do you have a set of particular procurement tactics that you would say they're not going anywhere? They're here to stay?
Well, yeah, I think all tactics, they come and go. They all keep on existing. They shift and might disappear a while, but come back again with new people coming in on the buyer side. And that's a constant challenge for companies that don't want to sell to the lowest price, because they communicate the advantages of focusing more on investments and end results. And then the customer starts buying like that. And then for a few years, and then someone new come in and don't have the history and start all over again on square one with lowest price. And this is why it's so important, the thing I mentioned earlier, that politicians and management must say, whatever we buy, we have to solve a problem with it. The end result must solve a problem. And the problem is rarely if it differs a euro or not on the product.
So again, back to it, tactics. I mean, is there any that are not going anywhere, or are there tactics also that you see that are dead and gone?
Mm-hmm. Well, we've all seen the procurement officer with this approach that I am the procurement officer, so I make all the important decisions.
Right.
So that's sort of that sort
You
of
think
person.
do you think that that's something of yesteryear? Like that's kind of no longer the boisterous procurement officer coming in and deciding everything?
Yes and no. Well, that sort of personality never goes away. They always come up. So
Okay.
it's sort of inbred in the DNA of some people. But as soon as there are rules, they can be complete, not so nice people because they have the right according to the rules. But the rules aren't what we buy. That's why one reason of why we buy. But it's very important to understand that the public procurement officer is not a buyer. They are administrators of what the buyer wants. They help the buyer that pays for their job to make the best investment and the need. So, because of that, some public entities had that approach that we want to decide. I made a list with some of my clients where we made no-go lists that we send out to clients before they make a procurement, saying, "Hello, this is our blacklist of demands and requirements that we simply don't accept, and we will not send in a tender if this is a part of procurement documents." But if you ask in this way instead, we, one, have a chance to participate, or two, you have a chance to get much better end result of the investment. And that offers reason with them. We get meetings because of that.
Very interesting. You touch on something that I want to double back to. You said that a public procurement officer, they're not the buyer, they are the administrator of the buying activity. And well, what money are they buying with? They're buying with taxpayer money often, right? So I'm interested in, how do you see public procurement having an external pressure to ensure that they spend taxpayer money in a responsible manner, and also maybe like what is responsible within public procurement?
Well, when I make a procurement, when I'm on the buyer side, the first thing I need is the right team and the right approach. And the right team contains procurement officer, or quite often it's me that's the procurement officer. But first of all, the client, buyer's too wide a word. So that we use the client, and the client is the person that has got the money to buy. And that's one person. That's often the manager of this public entity. And so it's the same thing as when you go into a store and buy something. You're going to buy a shirt. It's your money and it's your shirt and you use it. You're the client there.
Right.
But if you told me to buy your shirt and gave me your money, and I go into a store and buy a hideous shirt for you, and I tell you, here's the shirt, and here's €5 back, and you say, I don't like this shirt. That's the risk you took when you told me to buy something to you without knowing really what you wanted or having an expertise. And if you scale that up, I could also say, well, I'm sorry, but I bought 5,000 of these shirts now, so everyone in this department will have to use them for the next 4 years.
Understood. Yeah. So how do you make sure that you avoid getting the wrong shirt then
and that's
for the taxpayer?
The first thing person in the team is the buyer, the client, which is often, as I said, the manager of an entity. And then second, and their role is to say, the end result I want is this. I want to go from A to B. We're here now. We're too busy with doing this. We have this problem and that problem. I want those problems to go away so that we can focus on developing IT or renovating our public housing, or more money to renovate. or getting more patients through the hospital. That's the end result I want. Okay, great. Then now we have a clear goal. We're making a transition, move from A to B, and then some. But once they get the question, okay, how should we get that? How should we procure that? Their answer is often, oh, I don't know that, but this is my goal. That's what I want to use my money for. Okay, now it's time to take in the second part of the team, which I call the experts, and they must be both experts on well, it's a technical thing, technical areas, and the subject, the thing, the service, the product that we're buying. They have to be experts within that field, and also experts on the market. Which suppliers would be the best fit for us to perform this? And that could be about how big should it be, what expertise should you have, which ones of those are good. They must really know the companies. So those two together, the experts and the client, that knows about the need, they work together. And once they've put down the goal for investment and what they expect the supplier to, which problems they expect the supplier to solve, then they can go to the procurement officer and say, this is what we want. Now please put the layer of procurement process on this. Which procurement process should we need, use, and which agreement could be good to have, stuff like that.
So hopefully then with having good framework and the right team, the right subject matter expertise, everybody has shirts on their back that they like and enjoy. Yeah. Understood. Well, thanks for taking the time to be able to chat with us today, Magnus. There's so many more questions that I have that we could get into, but unfortunately we don't have the time today. I would love to finish off though with a quick fire round that we like to do with a lot of our guests, the Kodiak Moment, as we like to call it. A few questions to be able to get you to know you, Magnus Josephson, as the person, beyond, of course, the public procurement expert. One word, one kind of sentence answers, quick fire. Sound like a plan?
Okay, yeah, fire away.
All right. If you have a vacation that is all expenses paid, I hand over the tickets. You're leaving tomorrow morning. You can take whoever you want, your family, a friend, so forth and so on. Where are you heading?
I'd go to USA and travel around there and visiting all the music bars I could find.
All right.
Quite much into music, and there are so many good musicians and bands there. And I would, of course, bring my wife.
Very exciting. Is there a particular musician that you're listening to on Spotify very often today?
If I have to pick one, it's I often fall back to David Bowie. It's legend. Right now I listen quite a lot to The Who because I'm reading a book about the drummer in The Who, Keith Moon.
Okay.
But I've listened to the last 100 years of hits, I can say, from the 1920s to the 2020s.
Very cool. As we know in Swedish, we have a phrase called paradrätt, which means, of course, your go-to dish that you're making for dinner. If I'm coming over for dinner, what are you making as your paradrätt, Magnus?
That would be lamb steak.
Sounds very nice. I'm actually looking to have that at my girlfriend's parents' house this upcoming weekend. So I'm looking forward to that. Yes, exactly. Well, thank you so much for the time, Magnus. You've been a pleasure to have on the show. It was great to hear a little bit more about your insights as well as the world of public procurement. If people want to get in touch or get to know more about what you're doing, how can they reach out to you?
LinkedIn, preferably, Magnus Josephson. Or on my webpage, magnusjosephson.se or .com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the time today. It was awesome having you on, and the best of luck to you.
Thank you very much for having me. So nice.